3:17 local time. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from the sky. It came from beneath the surface. Inside the Combat Information Center of the U.S. Navy destroyer, guarding the carrier's starboard side, the room was almost completely dark. Only the glow of radar screens, sonar displays, and pale tactical maps lit the faces of the sailors on watch. Outside, the ocean looked like black metal under a moonless sky. The carrier moved forward at a steady pace, enormous and calm, marked only by the faint red light of nighttime flight deck operations. Then one sonar operator leaned closer to his screen. A thin mark had appeared on the acoustic display, slow, deep, out of place. He adjusted his headset, replayed the sound, and listened again. The sea was filled with noise, merchant traffic, waves striking steel, distant engine wash, and the low mechanical rhythm of the carrier strike group itself. But this sound did not match a tanker, a fishing vessel, or a friendly escort. It was too controlled, too patient, too quiet. The sonar chief stepped in behind him. "Run it again!" The operator replayed the feed. A low-frequency signature moved across the screen. 10 seconds later, another trace appeared farther east, fainter, deeper, traveling on a slightly different bearing. The chief said nothing for 3 long seconds. Then a third contact appeared, bearing 086, subsurface, slow speed, closing. That was the moment the room changed. No one panicked. No one shouted. This was the U.S. Navy, and panic is not part of the procedure. But every sailor inside that combat center understood what it meant when 3 underwater contacts appeared around a carrier formation at 3 in the morning. 1 submarine could be a shadow, 2 could be surveillance, 3 meant geometry. And at sea, geometry often means someone is trying to build a problem around you. The tactical action officer moved toward the sonar station. His voice stayed low and steady. "Classify." The sonar team started working fast. They checked bearing drift, speed estimates, depth behavior, and acoustic patterns. The first contact was easier to hear by submarine standards, running shallow enough to blend with background clutter. Small diesel-electric profile, aggressive, not especially refined. The second contact was different. It stayed deeper, moved with discipline, and kept its signature hidden behind layers of ocean noise. The third behaved the same way, appearing in fragments, fading, and then returning on a new bearing. That was not luck. That was training. On the main tactical display, the carrier remained at the center of the formation, a giant symbol moving northeast. Around it, the escorts held their sectors. Destroyers, cruisers, helicopter-capable ships, all linked together into one defensive network. And beneath that network, something was sliding into position. The watch officer contacted the bridge. Possible subsurface contacts. 3, multiple bearings. Recommend elevated ASW posture. On the bridge, the destroyer's captain stood near the forward windows, looking into the dark water. He did not ask if they were certain. In this world, certainty often arrives too late. He gave the order. "Bring the ship to anti-submarine condition." Across the destroyer, the shift happened quietly and immediately. Internal communications came alive. Sonar teams doubled their focus. Crews moved with purpose. The helicopter detachment was alerted. Across the formation, encrypted data links pushed the same picture to every ship in the strike group. 3 unknown underwater contacts. Closing pattern, no radio traffic, no transponder, no innocent explanation. Because submarines do not accidentally form a loose triangle around an American aircraft carrier. That kind of pattern usually requires planning, coordination, and a very confident belief that the ocean still belongs to whoever moves quietly enough. That belief was about to have a difficult morning. At 3:20, the carrier received the update. Deep inside its own combat direction center, officers watched the underwater picture form around them. The ship did not turn suddenly, it did not speed up in a dramatic way, it did not reveal concern through nervous movement. The carrier held course. That was the first message. The U.S. Navy does not survive by flinching every time something moves in the dark. But the escorts expanded their awareness. One destroyer began listening harder with its towed array. Another shifted slightly to improve sonar coverage. The formation opened just enough to give the carrier more room, while keeping the protective screen intact. Then the first contact changed speed. Not by much. Just enough. The sonar operator caught it immediately. Contact 1, increasing revolutions. The tactical action officer looked up. Say again. Contact 1, increasing revolutions. Bearing steady, still closing. The shallow contact crept toward the outer edge of the formation. Its movement was not fast, but it was deliberate. The other 2 contacts remained deeper, holding position like patient shadows, while the louder one moved first. A classic pressure move. Send the noisy one forward, keep the quieter ones hidden, force the target to react. That might work against a merchant ship. It might even unsettle an unprepared Navy. But a carrier strike group is not one ship. It is a floating nervous system, and every nerve had just gone alert. At 3:22, a new sound cut through the sonar feed. Short, mechanical, sharp. The operator froze for half a second, then marked the recording. The sonar chief leaned toward the speaker. There it was again, a brief metallic movement under pressure. Maybe a pump, maybe a hatch. Maybe the kind of sound nobody wants to hear from a submarine closing on a carrier in the dark. The tactical action officer did not wait for a debate. Possible tube activity. Notify all stations. Across the destroyer, lights shifted. Sailors moved faster now. The Seahawk crew on the flight deck began final checks. The rotor blades were still tied down, but not for long. The captain looked once toward the black ocean ahead. Somewhere under the surface, 3 submarines were testing how close they could get before the Americans responded. They had their answer. At 3:23, the carrier strike group came fully awake, and the ocean no longer sounded empty. 3:24 local time. The first helicopter crew reached the flight deck before the rotors were even unlocked. Red light washed over the destroyer as sailors moved through the darkness with trained speed. Nobody was running out of fear. They were moving fast because every second mattered. And somewhere beneath the black surface, 3 submarines had become everyone's problem. The MH-60R Seahawk sat chained to the deck, its folded blades dark and still against the night. Around it, crew chiefs pulled covers, checked tie-downs, inspected systems, and prepared the aircraft for the mission every anti-submarine crew trains for, but never wants to launch into blind. In 6 minutes, the ocean had gone from quiet to crowded. Inside the Combat Information Center, the sonar picture was becoming sharper. Contact 1 remained the easiest to hear. It was shallow, impatient, and mechanically rough around the edges. Its propeller rhythm had the uneven texture of a diesel-electric submarine trying to stay quiet while moving faster than it should. Not harmless, not invisible either. The sonar chief listened again, eyes narrowed. Contact 1 is likely Iranian-built or Iranian-operated. Small diesel-electric profile, running shallow, bearing steady. No one in the room celebrated the classification because the second and third contacts were the real concern. They were deeper, quieter, cleaner. They moved with the kind of restraint that suggested crews trained to let someone else create the noise. Their acoustic signatures were so faint that the ocean tried to swallow them every few seconds. But each time the towed array cleaned the signal, the pattern returned. 2 deep contacts separated by several miles, holding angles on the carrier's projected path. That was when the tactical action officer understood the shape of the situation. The Iranian profile submarine was not the main point. It was the flashlight, loud enough to draw attention, close enough to force a response, useful enough to pull American sensors one way while the quieter submarines improved their positions. A simple trick, maybe. But simple tricks can become serious when they happen beneath a carrier at night. The officer leaned toward the display. Contacts 2 and 3, the sonar supervisor answered without looking away. Possible Russian signatures, deep running, low cavitation, coordinated movement. That changed the room again. Russian submarines do not drift into a carrier screen by accident. Iranian submarines do not appear on the same timing by coincidence. And 3 boats from 2 nations do not form a pressure triangle around a U.S. aircraft carrier because everyone took the wrong route before breakfast. The bridge received the update. The captain listened, expression unreadable. Launch Seahawk on deck. The order came through in short, clipped bursts. The Seahawk's rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, slicing the night air into a rising thunder. Navigation lights blinked against the Black Sea. The crew locked in, helmets down, sensors warming, dipping sonar ready, sonobuoy pattern loaded. At 3:27, the helicopter lifted from the destroyer's deck and moved over the water. Low, fast, controlled. Its first job was not to engage. Its first job was to make the ocean speak. The Seahawk banked toward the forward edge of the formation and began dropping sonobuoys in a wide arc. One after another, small cylinders hit the water, floated, deployed, and opened their ears beneath the surface. Within seconds, their data fed back into the network, adding new pieces to the underwater map. The first buoy caught Contact 1 clearly, too clearly. It was closer than expected. Contact 1 now inside outer ASW screen. The Iranian profile submarine had pushed forward again. A bad idea, not catastrophic yet, just bad. The kind of bad that begins with confidence and ends with a very long briefing in a very small room. The U.S. formation adjusted. One destroyer shifted slightly east to block the approach. Another held west, protecting the carrier's turn radius. The carrier itself remained steady, its enormous hull still moving through the darkness as if nothing beneath the surface had earned the right to disturb it. That was deliberate. A carrier does not dart around the ocean like a frightened speedboat. It moves with mass, purpose, and escorts designed to punish poor underwater decisions. At 3:29, Contact 2 changed depth. The movement was subtle. A small vertical adjustment. Not enough to withdraw, not enough to advance, just enough to reposition. Then Contact 3 slowed almost to a crawl. The sonar chief marked both movements. "They're coordinating." The tactical action officer nodded once. "Or trying to." The Seahawk dropped another line of buoys, tightening the acoustic fence. The data improved. Bearings stabilized. Contact 2, deep and quiet, was now holding off the carrier's port bow. Contact 3 remained farther out, almost motionless, waiting in the dark. Contact 1 continued forward, making just enough noise to be useful. The pattern was unmistakable now. One submarine pressing, two submarines shaping the field. The pressure move was closing. At 3:31, active sonar was authorized from one of the escorts. A sharp pulse rolled through the water, then another. For a moment, even the combat center seemed to hold its breath. Active sonar is not subtle. It is not polite. It is the Navy knocking on the ocean's front door with a steel hammer and asking who is hiding inside. The return came back strong. Contact 1 confirmed. Then a fainter return. Contact 2. Then, after a delay, buried beneath thermal layers and distance. Contact 3 confirmed. 3 submarines, 3 positions, 1 carrier, and now the Americans had them all on the board. At 3:32, a short mechanical transient snapped across the buoy field from Contact 1's bearing. The same type of sound heard minutes earlier. Sharper this time. Cleaner. The sonar operator turned toward the tactical action officer. Possible outer door movement. The room went silent. The Seahawk circled overhead, sensors fixed on the water below. The destroyers held their lines. The carrier continued forward, steady and massive, while the pattern beneath it finally revealed its shape. 3 submarines had come searching in the dark, and they were about to learn that the dark did not belong only to them. 3:32 local time. The first high-speed underwater contact appeared as a thin, bright streak on the display. It was not where anyone wanted it to be. On the sonar screen, the track broke away from Contact 1's bearing and began moving fast, far faster than a submarine, far too straight to be background noise. The operator marked it, measured it, and waited one more second before saying the phrase no carrier escort wants to hear at 3 in the morning. Possible high-speed underwater object in the water. The Combat Information Center went quiet. Not frozen, focused. Every sailor in that room knew the difference between a confirmed threat, a false track, and a decoy. They also knew that waiting too long to figure out which one it was could turn a billion-dollar ship into a headline no one wanted to read. The tactical action officer stepped forward. Bearing 083, high-speed underwater contact, closing outer screen. The captain's voice came over the circuit from the bridge. Execute torpedo defense. Weapons tight. Confirm before engagement. That was the line. Defend immediately. Do not escalate blindly. Because the ocean was now full of possibilities and none of them were good. The destroyer's countermeasure system came alive. A towed acoustic decoy deployed into the black water behind the ship, broadcasting a false signature designed to confuse an incoming object. Another escort launched its own countermeasure seconds later. The carrier adjusted course by only a few degrees. A controlled turn that opened distance without breaking formation. No wild moves, no dramatic overcorrection. A carrier strike group does not survive by acting scared. It survives by making fear irrelevant. Above the water, the MH-60R Seahawk dropped lower, banking hard across the eastern edge of the formation. Its crew pushed more sonobuoys into the sea, expanding the acoustic net ahead of the suspected track. The sensors listened. The operators waited. Then the high-speed track shifted slightly toward the decoy. That was the first good sign. If it was a live system, the countermeasure had caught its attention. If it was a training device, probe, or unmanned underwater vehicle, it had just revealed behavior the Navy could use. Either way, it was no longer moving cleanly toward the carrier. Inside the combat center, nobody relaxed because Contact 2 had just moved. The deeper Russian profile submarine, the one holding off the carrier's port bow, changed angle while everyone was watching the high-speed track. It was subtle, almost elegant. A few degrees of bearing shift. A slight increase in revolutions. Enough to slide toward a better position. While the formation's attention was divided, the sonar chief caught it immediately. Contact 2 is maneuvering. Bearing drift increasing. Possible attack geometry. There it was. The real play. Contact 1 had made the noise. The high-speed track had forced a defensive response, and Contact 2 was trying to use that moment to improve its angle. For a few seconds, the whole picture became clear. The Iranian profile boat was the distraction. The high-speed object was the push. The Russian profile boat was the main pressure point. Not a bad plan, assuming the United States Navy had somehow forgotten that submarines exist. It had not. The tactical action officer pointed to the screen. Shift active search sector. Put pressure on contact 2. A destroyer on the port side answered first. Its active sonar pulse rolled through the water, hard and sharp. Then another pulse followed from a second escort, timed to avoid interference. The returns came back broken by thermal layers, but good enough. Contact 2 was there, deep, moving, no longer comfortable. The Seahawk sensor operator redirected the buoy field, building a new line across Contact 2's path. The helicopter did not need to engage. It only needed to keep listening, keep marking, and keep shrinking the submarine's options. That is the hard truth of modern anti-submarine warfare. The final move is not always the most dangerous part. Sometimes the dangerous part is simply being found. At 3:35, the high-speed underwater contact began to lose coherence. Its acoustic signature scattered, wavered, and drifted hard toward the decoy. The operators compared speed, bearing, and acoustic return. It no longer behaved like a clean inbound threat. Track seduced by countermeasure, the sonar operator reported. No longer closing carrier. The room exhaled only slightly because Contact 3, the second deep Russian profile submarine, had gone almost completely quiet. Not gone, quiet. There is a difference. A submarine disappearing from sonar does not mean it left. It means it wants you to believe it did. The P-8 Poseidon entered the network at 3:36. High above the formation, far beyond visual range, the maritime patrol aircraft began receiving the same underwater picture from the ships and helicopter below. Within seconds, it was building a wider search box, projecting possible submarine paths and preparing to drop its own sonobuoy pattern ahead of the carrier's route. The sea was no longer being watched only from the surface. It was being mapped from above. Contact 3 reappeared 30 seconds later. Faint, deep, but there. The P-8's first buoy line caught a fragment of machinery noise, then another. Not enough for a perfect solution, but enough to prove the submarine had not slipped away. The contact was now outside its ideal position and drifting wider than planned. That mattered. These kinds of coordinated moves depend on timing. Break the timing, and the entire plan becomes traffic. At 3:38, Contact 1 turned away from the outer screen, likely reacting to the pressure from the Seahawk overhead. Contact 2 slowed. Contact 3 held depth but lost angle. The carrier continued forward, still intact, still calm, still surrounded by escorts that now knew exactly where to look. The tactical display had changed completely. 5 minutes earlier, the submarines had been ghosts. Now they were tracks. Measured, named, stored. Every bearing change, every mechanical noise, every attempted reposition was being recorded. The other side had wanted a moment of confusion. Instead, they had handed the Navy a pattern. At 3:39, the tactical action officer looked at the updated map. The possible high-speed threat was drifting harmlessly behind the decoy. Contact 1 was pulling away under pressure. Contact 2 had been forced out of its best angle. Contact 3 had been reacquired by the P-8. No dramatic exchange, no impact, no panic. Just a carrier strike group doing exactly what it was built to do. Turn confusion into geometry and geometry into control. The captain's voice came through again. Maintain track on all contacts. Do not let them disappear. The order moved across the formation. The Seahawk banked into another orbit. The P-8 widened its search pattern. The destroyers held their sonar lines. The carrier pressed on through the darkness, its deck lights glowing red above a sea that was no longer hiding anything for free. For the first time that morning, the hunters were on the screen, not as ghosts, as targets. 3:40 local time. The carrier was still safe. That was the first fact. No impact, no flooding, no emergency crews rushing through passageways. The massive flight deck kept moving through the dark sea, red lights glowing along its edges. Aircraft remained chained down, engines cold, crew awake. The first move had failed to land. Now the ocean belonged to the side that could see. Inside the combat information center of the lead escort destroyer, the tactical display no longer showed mystery. It showed structure. Contact 1, the Iranian profile diesel-electric submarine, was now moving away from the outer screen after being pressured by the Seahawk. Contact 2, the deeper Russian profile contact, had lost its best angle. Contact 3 remained farthest out. Quiet, but no longer cleanly hidden. 3 submarines had entered the situation as shadows. They were now numbered problems. The tactical action officer stood over the display, one hand resting on the console rail. Maintain active pressure on Contact 2. Keep passive hold on 3. Seahawk stays on 1. The orders moved instantly across the network. No speech-making. No drama. No Hollywood countdown. Just a carrier strike group doing math with steel. At 3:41, the portside destroyer sent another active sonar pulse into the water. The sound rolled outward like a hammer strike through the deep. Contact 2 reacted almost immediately. Its bearing shifted. Then its depth changed again. That was the submarine's mistake. A quiet submarine can hide. A maneuvering submarine talks. The sonar chief caught the change and marked it. Contact 2 increasing depth. Slight speed change. Still tracking. The Russian profile boat had been trying to slip under a thermal layer, using temperature gradients in the ocean as camouflage. Smart, professional. Exactly the kind of move expected from a crew that knew what it was doing. But the American net was no longer standing still. The P-8 Poseidon adjusted its search pattern overhead and dropped another string of sonobuoys ahead of the submarine's projected path. One buoy splashed down, then another, then another. Each one became a listening post in the dark water, turning empty ocean into a room full of witnesses. Contact 2 crossed the edge of the new field at 3:43. The return was faint, but faint was enough. The P-8 crew sent the update back to the strike group. Contact 2's projected path appeared on every tactical display in the formation. The submarine was not boxed in completely, but it was being herded. And for a submarine, being herded is the beginning of a very uncomfortable day. On the eastern side of the formation, the MH-60R Seahawk kept Contact 1 under constant pressure. The Iranian profile boat tried to reduce noise, but it was shallow, surrounded by buoy coverage, and forced to choose between slowing down or drifting into a worse position. It chose to slow. That made it easier to track. Then it tried to turn. That made it louder. There are no perfect choices when the aircraft above you has dipping sonar and absolutely no interest in making your morning easier. The Seahawk descended into a hover, its rotor wash flattening the surface below. The crew lowered the dipping sonar into the black water. The cable paid out smoothly, disappearing beneath the wave. Inside the helicopter, the sensor operator leaned into the feed. A few seconds later, the signal came back. Strong. Close. Contact 1 confirmed. Bearing stable. Submarine is turning away. On the destroyer, the report landed exactly as expected. The Iranian profile boat was retreating from the carrier's path. Not dramatically, not in panic, but clearly enough that the geometry changed. One side of the pressure triangle had just folded. The commander did not celebrate. He simply gave the next order. Keep him honest. The Seahawk stayed on station. Because in anti-submarine warfare, trust is how ships get holes in them. At 3:45, Contact 3 made its move. The farthest Russian profile submarine, the quietest of the three, began a slow drift south, almost as if trying to become irrelevant. It reduced speed until its acoustic signature nearly melted into background noise. No sudden turn, no aggressive posture. Just a patient attempt to leave the board without admitting the plan had failed. The sonar team watched it. The P-8 watched it. The destroyers watched it. The ocean watched it. And then the southern escort went active. One sonar pulse, then another. The return flickered, but it was there. Contact 3 had not disappeared. It had only become less confident. The tactical action officer allowed himself half a breath of dry humor. Mark Contact 3 is still invited to the party. Nobody laughed loudly, but a few sailors smiled for a moment. Then the work continued. At 3:46, the carrier changed course by 5 degrees. Not a retreat, not a nervous turn. A controlled adjustment calculated to widen separation from the submarine triangle and force every underwater contact to either follow, expose itself, or abandon position. That 5-degree turn broke the pattern completely. Contact 1 was already moving away. Contact 2 could no longer regain a useful angle without increasing speed and giving up stealth. Contact 3 was too far out and too closely watched to close the gap. The formation had taken the other side's design and stretched it until it no longer worked. At 3:48, the strike group transmitted on an open maritime safety frequency and through underwater acoustic signaling. Subsurface contacts operating near United States naval formation. Alter course immediately. Your position is known. Your movements are being recorded. The message was not shouted. It did not need to be. A threat sounds emotional. A fact sounds worse. The submarines heard it in one form or another. Maybe through acoustic warning. Maybe through intercepted surface traffic. Maybe through the sudden realization that every attempt to reposition was being answered before it could matter. Contact 1 turned farther east. Contact 2 slowed again. Contact 3 stopped drifting south and held depth. That was the sound of confidence leaving the room, assuming submarines had rooms large enough to hold confidence. At 3:49, the U.S. Navy had not released anything into the water. It had not turned the sea into a spectacle for the sake of a headline. It had done something colder. It had taken control. Every concerning movement was tracked. Every acoustic signature was stored, every maneuver was logged. The attempted pressure move had stopped being a surprise and had become a file, timestamped and backed by sensor data from destroyers, helicopter, and patrol aircraft. That is the part rivals keep forgetting. When you approach a carrier strike group, you are not only testing its defenses, you are feeding the machine. The carrier continued northeast, steady and untouched. Behind it, the escorts held their screen. Above it, the P-8 widened its orbit. Over the water, the Seahawk hovered like a patient reminder that hiding is difficult when the sky is listening. 3 submarines had come in looking for a vulnerable giant. Instead, they found a network. And by 3:50, the ocean had turned against them. 3:50 local time. The first submarine to break away was the Iranian profile boat. Not dramatically. Not in a frantic sprint, just a slow, visible turn to the east, away from the carrier's projected path and out of the pressure zone created by the Seahawk overhead. On the tactical display, Contact One's track bent like a wire under stress. The sonar chief watched it for several seconds before speaking. Contact One is opening range. Nobody cheered. That was not how this worked. A submarine moving away could still listen. It could still turn back. It could still leave behind a decoy, a drone, or an unpleasant surprise for anyone careless enough to assume the story was over. The tactical action officer gave the order immediately. Maintain track. Do not close. Do not provoke. That was the balance. Pressure without panic. Control without ego. Because the U.S. Navy does not need to chase every retreating submarine as if it owes the ocean money. Sometimes the smarter move is to let the other side leave while recording exactly how it leaves. And Contact One was giving them plenty. Its engine rhythm changed as it increased distance. Its propeller signature sharpened during the turn. Its depth control produced a faint mechanical pattern that sonar analysts would study later, frame by frame, frequency by frequency. What had entered the situation as a hidden threat was now becoming a library entry. Not exactly the glorious briefing anyone had probably imagined. At 3:53, Contact 2 made its decision. The deeper Russian profile submarine reduced speed and began descending again, trying to slip beneath the same thermal layer it had used earlier. It was a professional move. Quiet, disciplined, patient, but late. The P-8 Poseidon had already anticipated that path. 2 sonobuoys sat ahead of the submarine's projected movement. A third was dropped to close the gap. Within seconds, the acoustic net caught another faint machinery transient. Contact 2 was still there, still moving, still known. Inside the P-8, operators tagged the return and pushed it across the data link. On the destroyer's display, the submarine's projected track updated again. The Russian profile boat had not vanished. It had simply requested more attention from everyone wearing headphones. Request granted. The portside destroyer kept passive hold while another escort maintained distance. No dramatic exchange followed, no unnecessary escalation. That restraint was not weakness, it was command discipline. A submarine can be dangerous. A submarine that knows it is being tracked is also making decisions under pressure, and pressure reveals habits. At 3:56, Contact 3 finally turned south. For almost 20 minutes, it had been the quietest player in the pattern. It had moved the least, spoken the least, and tried hardest to let the others create the noise, but the carrier's 5-degree course change had ruined its geometry. The sonobuoy field had blocked its clean path. The active pings from the escorts had made staying hidden harder with every passing minute. So Contact 3 withdrew, slowly, reluctantly, professionally. But it withdrew. The tactical action officer watched all 3 tracks widen away from the carrier. 1 is opening east, 2 is deep and opening north, 3 is southbound. The captain's response was short. Keep recording. That was the real ending of the encounter. Not a spectacular launch, not a blast. Not a movie-style underwater duel that would look impressive only if physics had been written by a trailer editor. The real ending was quieter and far more useful. 3 submarines had tried to build pressure around an American aircraft carrier. All 3 were now leaving under observation. The carrier strike group did not stop. It did not reverse course. It did not scatter across the sea. It continued forward, steady and intact, while its escorts held the defensive screen and the aircraft above kept listening. At 400, the threat board changed from red to amber. Not clear, never fully clear, just reduced. The Seahawk remained airborne, circling the area where Contact 1 had first pressed too close. Its crew was running low on fuel, but still on station. The P-8 widened its orbit and continued building the larger acoustic picture. The destroyers kept their sonar arrays deployed, careful not to let the submarines fade too quickly into background noise. Every second mattered now. Not because the carrier was in immediate danger, but because intelligence was being collected. The Iranian profile boat's retreat pattern. The Russian profile boat's depth changes. Their timing, their spacing, their reaction to active sonar, their tolerance for helicopter pressure, their coordination once the plan began to fail. All of it mattered. This is the part most people never see. Modern naval warfare is not only about who acts first, it is about who learns fastest. And by that measure, the U.S. Navy had just received a very expensive lesson paid for by someone else. They came looking for a carrier. They left as acoustic signatures in a classified database. At 4:04, Contact 1 faded beyond reliable tracking range. The Seahawk marked the last bearing and turned back toward the destroyer. Contact 2 remained faint, but outbound. Contact 3 continued south, no longer holding any useful angle on the carrier. The encounter was over. The carrier was untouched. The formation was intact. And the submarines had lost the one thing submarines value most: mystery. That was the real damage. A submarine can survive being detected once, but when its acoustic fingerprint is captured, cataloged, compared, and distributed across the fleet, the next encounter becomes harder. The next hiding place becomes smaller. The next pressure move begins with the Americans already knowing what to listen for. At 4:07, the strike group resumed normal formation, but not normal awareness. No one on board believed the ocean was safe. Sailors do not make that mistake. The sea is never safe. It is only quiet between problems. But this problem had been handled. No panic, no unnecessary escalation, no retreat. 3 submarines had tried to close a triangle around a U.S. aircraft carrier, and the carrier strike group turned that triangle inside out with sonar, aircraft, discipline, and patience. Because that is the problem with trying to pressure the U.S. Navy. You are not facing one ship. You are facing a system, a floating airfield, a screen of destroyers, helicopters with dipping sonar, patrol aircraft overhead, sensor operators who can hear machines breathe through miles of water, commanders who do not need to raise their voices because the entire formation already knows what to do. So here is the question. If you were commanding that carrier strike group, would you have forced those submarines to surface, or was silently tracking them the smarter move? Drop your answer in the comments, because out here, the loudest tool is not always the one that makes the biggest sound. Sometimes it is a sonar screen, a comm commander, and a submarine crew realizing too late that the ocean is no longer on its side.